I'm Dave Dinkel, and welcome to seminar number 3, Building a Massive Buyers List, as the next one in my rescue series. To date, I've covered calculating ARV as the introduction, overcoming fear, seminar number 1, and contracting, seminar number 2. Coming in series number 4, we'll be looking at finding all the motivated sellers you can handle. Let's briefly discuss the players in a real estate purchase and sale. In most transactions, there are 3 basic parties: the original seller, the investor buyer, our wholesaler, and an end buyer. There can be many more parties involved if there is a daisy chain of investor sellers, each of whom is bringing his own buyer to closing. So instead of just an A to B and B to C, there's now an A, B, B, C, C, D, D, E, E, F, and so on. The problem with that daisy chain, it's only as strong as its weakest link. If one of those buyers does not come in, the whole thing collapses. In this case, F would be the end buyer. Now, there can be a few different types of parties in each leg of the transaction, and each can be a source of future revenue. What I'm saying here is look for these people, different types of parties, as sources of prospecting later. I'll show you in a moment. Seller A can be the property owner who is living in the property, a landlord, or an investor who is selling the property. Most investors will assume that each seller has only that one specific property. It may not be true. I always ask the seller a question: do you have any other properties for sale? In one case, the seller said, yes, I have 3 more. It's not that uncommon. Very oftentimes they have at least 2. They're being transferred or moving out of state. The other one will probably go up for sale. 2 are out of state and I didn't buy them, but I did buy an additional one, which happened to be next door to the one that I had purchased and rehabbed. Now, I didn't even clean it out, and I sold it for a net wholesale profit of $87,500 to another investor who did rehab it and made an additional $60,000 profit. However, it took him 4 months to get the rehab done and to wind up selling it. The property that I originally purchased from the buyer that I rehabbed, I netted a little over $120,000 profit. And this was all because I asked the question, by the way, do you have any other properties for sale? What happened in this case, the seller said to me, yes, I'm going to be selling my home, but not until April of the next year, which is 6 months away. And my comment to her was, well, why don't you let me buy it now, and you can stay in it until then. Buy it now means I put it under contract, and when she's ready to move, we go to closing with it. That's exactly what happened. And I made a case where you don't have to worry about putting it out and having people, trudge through your house. You don't have to pay real estate commission. You'll know that it's sold and you can get everything up, ready, and move. That's exactly what happened. April of next year, I bought the property, and as you see, I wholesaled it without even cleaning it out because she broom swept it before she left. You have the investor wholesaler designated as a B, typically someone who's wholesale flipping the property or selling his contract or beneficial interest to an end buyer. I say wholesale flipping because in most of the TV series, when they talk about flipping, they're talking about buying the property, rehabbing the property, and then selling it retail. Wholesale flipping means just that. You buy it, do not do any work on it, and sell it out to typically someone who's a rehabber. Now, this investor could use purchase options or contracts to secure an equitable interest in the property that will be resold as soon as possible. Again, no repairs done, usually not even a clean out. This term, equitable interest, is an extraordinarily powerful legal precedent. The state of Texas had some challenges in the court about signing a contract, having an equitable interest, and I think about 2 years ago they passed a regulation or a statute that said if you sign a contract, you have an equitable interest in the property, you then have the right to move forward with advertising the property and so on and so forth. So if an attorney says to you, you don't have the right, or you don't have the right to advertise the property, you do. Now, let's go one step further. Let's say you now have it under contract, you put it out to your buyers list. Another investor comes along and says, I've found a buyer for the property. Well, he should not have put it out on his list until he had some agreement with you, typically a JV agreement. Otherwise, he advertised it illegally, meaning if he wasn't licensed as a realtor, a licensed agent, he violated the state law in terms of advertising a property and earning what they would assume to be and enforce as a commission. So if you're going to do this, make sure you do it right. This becomes very important if you put other wholesalers' deals on your list. Now, the transfer can be by an assignment of contract where legal, sale of the contract, again where legal, or by doing a double closing, which is legal everywhere. Why am I saying where legal? Because more and more states are moving towards the very premise that by assigning a contract or selling the contract, you are generating a commission. Therefore, you have to be licensed. In the state of Illinois, you have to be a licensed broker to be able to do an assignment of contract or the sale of the contract or exercise an option. So in most cases, what we do is do a double closing. And if you say to me, what if the profit's not large enough to do a double closing? That's your fault. What you have to do is make sure your buyer's list is larger so that you have more competitiveness against each deal you get under contract. So we have the end buyer C in most cases who wants to use the property either to rehab it and sell it retail or hold it to rent. Does he want to buy it and rehab it and live in it? Doesn't matter. He's still the end buyer. Now, most wholesale transactions are sold to rehabbers who want to rehab, refurbish, or build a structure on the property. It's not uncommon to look at a property and say that has to be demoed, or the city or county has already issued a demo order. Now, there can be two types of orders out there. One's called a demo lien, which means if you don't do something in a certain amount of time, we're going to demo the property. And when that time is up, the city or county issues what's called a demo order, and it has a demo date. One of the original partners in the local REIA bought a property and had a demo order which he wasn't aware of. Not a bad looking property. It just, the city didn't like it, so they started tacking on fines and liens, and ultimately they said we're going to demo it. Of course, he came along and bought it. When he went out to get started on the rehab, it wasn't there, and he ultimately wound up giving the city the property as a playground area, rather than try and rebuild. So let's say you're looking at a property and it's going to be demoed. What does it cost to demo the property? I'm going to say somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000, depending on how much asbestos, either in the shingles, in the walls, on the wall coverings on the exterior shingle. Asbestos tiles were a very common thing in the early 40s to cover a building instead of wood on the outside or a cement block. They were wood frame and covered with whatever, usually planking, but oftentimes these wood shingles. They're full of asbestos. That's what they're made of. In addition, you have lead-based paint if it was built prior to 1978, and that's another separate issue. So let's say you're looking at a property and the guy says, look, it's only worth the value of the land. How do you determine what offer to make? What you have to do is look in the public record under the tax appraiser website and look at the land value of the property. Let's assume it's $40,000 and the structure or the building itself is another $60,000 or so thousand. What you're going to look at is simply, okay, I'm going to look at the $40,000 as the land value. I'm going to split that number in half, and I'm going to take away whatever my demo costs are going to be. So you're going to be offering somewhere around 1/3 to 1/4 of what the tax assessed value is. Is that a good deal for the seller? It depends on how motivated he is. If he wants to sit around and have a big lien on the property when the city actually does the demo, he can do that. But if he's motivated to get rid of the headache, then that's the kind of offer you got to at least start out at. Obviously, the degree of rehab is a function of what it can be sold for after the rehab and the initial condition of the property. So if the initial condition of the property is really pretty bad, it needs a complete rehab, and you don't have an after repaired value that's substantially above what you're going to pay for it, it's not a deal. Very oftentimes what we see with rehabbers is they have crews, and these crews are guys, if they're professional rehabbers, that they've accumulated over the years. And these guys work for them. Obviously, if they're still there, they do a good job, but these guys work and get paid week to week. And if they don't have a property for them to rehab, they go off and they work for another rehabber. So there is a onus that these rehabbers, these pros, they need to have a continuing stream of properties to feed their rehab crews. That's both good and bad. There's a rehabber in Texas that did 5,000 rehabbed homes, not new home constructions, rehabbed homes. And I think about 18 months ago, called it quits. He shut down all his rehab construction facilities and his workforce. And he changed the philosophy of the business entirely to wholesaling. and that's what he does now. I guess it took him a long time to learn his lesson. I'm sure he made money. But the reality is there's huge risk in rehabbing. Despite what you've been told and despite what you think, things can go wrong, especially, and I'm going to repeat it again, big red flags, especially if you're virtual rehabbing, where you're in one state, you find a property, and you sign up with all the people that do all the work on the other side of the country. That's where you can really lose a lot of money. Even in virtual wholesaling, I've had a lot of people that have come to me and said, I want to come in the program, mentoring program. I've done virtual wholesaling up till now. And I said, well, great. How'd you do? And they said, oh, I did wonderfully on the first and second one. But after that, I got stuck in one in, say, New York, and I can't get out of it. So be careful about an exit strategy if you're going to do virtual wholesaling, and be prepared to lose your earnest money deposit rather than to go into a money pit that can't be sold. Now, lipsticking is something, I don't know if I created the term a long time ago, but property gets about 85% of the retail value when it's sold, but it keeps repair costs to a minimum. What is lipsticking? Lipsticking is pretty straightforward. When you come into the property, what you look at is how much of a kitchen rehab does it need. You cannot get into a lipstick and start talking about replacing cabinets. However, the counter surfaces can be replaced, and they very much upgrade the kitchen itself by doing that. And at the same time, if you put in a backsplash that matches the countertop can be granite. Now, granite costs somewhere between $25 and $50 a square foot, but granite 12 by 12 inch tiles are considerably less expensive, and you can put in bullnose along the edge that matches the granite and put in the backsplash for less than $10 a square foot in most cases, and sometimes less than $5 a square foot, and in one weekend, most importantly. And that gets about 85% of the retail value in the marketplace. You do not replace bathrooms, which replaces a bathroom vanity if you have to. You're going to patch and paint the walls, and if you absolutely have to, you put in new floor coverings. One of the biggest mechanical systems in a house is the roof, probably the most expensive. And the issue with the roof is if it's more than 15 years old, very oftentimes an insurance company will not insure the property anymore. That means you're going to either have to have a new roof or not buy the property. So when you go into it, you've got to look at, especially shingle roofs, if they're curled at the edges at all, or have an inspector come out and look at them and tell you how old is the roof. Because oftentimes the seller will say, I don't know, I bought it that way, whether or not he put a new roof on or not. If you don't do the roof and you go in to find a buyer, do the rehab, conventional buyer comes along, says, I really want the property. You get the appraisal comes in lower. You say, oh man, I got a great deal. He goes to his lender. The lender said, yeah, here's a checklist of what we need, including insurance on the property. Well, you can't get insurance because it won't insure the property because of the age of the roof. So you don't set yourself up for failure before you get into some of these things. All right, so we're back on track here. The type of property doesn't really matter and could be raw land, commercial buildings, or even new construction projects. The difference in these types of transactions is, most importantly, the inspection period. Instead of having 15 days or less for as you do in a single family home, what you have is a due diligence period. In raw land and commercial buildings, that can be anywhere from 90 days to 180 days, especially in large multifamily projects. And very oftentimes raw land is done by an option contract. Commercial properties are done by a letter of intent to begin the process. In this case, we're not concerned about those, but I wanted to just put them in front of you to give you an idea that there are other ways to do the same thing, wholesaling. Once an investor gets a property under contract and he goes to flip it or wholesale it, that's when the stuff starts to happen. The biggest issue I see for new investors is they didn't think a lot about who they could sell the property to once they got a contract. When I ask investors how many buyers they have on their email list, typically the response is less than 25. Now why? It's because they haven't focused on finding cash buyers. More than likely what they've done is gone to local REIAs, taken business cards, maybe even gone online, or had referrals from other investors for buyers. Less than 100 is a dangerous level because you just don't have enough to be competitive with one another. Now, if all of these guys, or most of them, are whale buyers, then there will be a chance of selling the deal. What's a whale buyer? A whale buyer is a guy that buys anywhere from 5 to 50 properties a month. How did I come up with the term whale? I just did because I like the term whale because they're big and bloaty most cases. They can be hedge funds, iBuyers, large individuals. Typically, my whale buyers were large individuals, not meaning in stature, but they had a lot of funds available. One of whom owned 600 properties, and we continuously sold to him until one day we did a double closing, and for some reason he found out that we made an $18,000 profit. And he came back complaining that we made too much money. He doubled his money when he resold the property, but we made too much money, making an $18,000 profit. He went on to say that the other wholesalers he worked with only charged him a $1,500 or $2,000 markup. So what we said was, okay, if you see a deal you want from us, you're going to have to pay what we have it offered for. We're not going to give it to you for that kind of markup. We can't make a living. He didn't seem to care about that. And it took him almost 3 months to come back and start doing deals with us. And he never brought up that issue again. The problem I have with that $1,500 or $2,000 or $5,000 is it's almost impossible for the average wholesaler to make a living doing that until he gets to a volume where he does 20 or 50 deals a month, which is not out of the realm of reality, but it takes time to get there. And I don't want you to go broke before you get to a point where you're a massive wholesaler. So beware of dying whales. And I told you what whales are now. What's a dying whale? These are the guys that brag about how many properties they own, how long they've been in the business. They go on and on about, I'm doing you a favor by buying this property from you. Those are the guys that very oftentimes squeeze you to your eyes bleed, and then they don't close sometimes. You know, the old adage about buyer beware. In this case, it should be seller beware, because these sophisticated buyers often take advantage, especially of new wholesalers. How do they take advantage? Well, they know, first of all, that the wholesaler has an inspection period and must sell it. He's a truly motivated seller. It's the same thing the investor is looking for of the homeowner's truly motivated seller. He gets it under contract, he has an inspection period, and boom, he has to be out. So when he goes to the wholesaler and delivers a contract to him, it says closing date before the 17th. On or before the 17th, that whale buyer knows that if he doesn't close on the 17th, the likelihood is that investor is going to lose the deal. The bigger issue to me is they'll also find out who the original seller is, and they can very easily go around you. 2 days after they told you they're not going to close because of COVID-19, their lender's not coming through on time, whatever the excuse, if you can't get an extension from the original seller, they will go directly to the original seller and say, hi, my name's Joe. I'm actually the buyer in this whole deal. Dave was what's called a wholesaler, and I'm not exactly sure what price he offered you. They know exactly, because they found out from you in most cases, what price you have it for. He then offers them a couple $1,000s more. They wind up closing directly with him, and you're shut out of the deal. I coined the phrase black hat wholesalers. That's what they can be. You have to be very careful. This comes up all the time. They simply ask you in the first conversation, what did you get it for? And your response should be, does it really matter? Is it workable for you at that price or not? They'll say to you, I'm going to work my numbers. That means they're going to go back and figure out how much less they can pay you, and it usually takes a couple, 3 days. So you're into the inspection period, you're losing time every day, and they're going to come back to you. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. So these whale buyers, I call them dying whale buyers, because they're not really buyers on a regular basis. They're intermittent based on the best deals they can twist you out of, so to speak. The true whale buyers have funds available all the time, and they just keep buying properties. And I say this not tongue-in-cheek. That question, what did you get it for, has likely caused wholesalers billions of dollars in lost profits. Now, where do those lost profits go to? They go to the whale buyers. That's all there is to it. In one of the recent DREA meetings, I showed an example of an iBuyer where the investor came in with a $53,000 profit under his belt, and when he walked away and the smoke cleared because he had to sell it, he wound up with a net profit of only $1,200 or $1,500. So don't let this kind of thing happen to you. The way to stop it is to have a strong buyers list. That's why we're here talking about buyers. So let's answer this fable question. Does the size matter? That's the size of your buyers list. I'm going to say your buyers list should be 300 plus to attain self-sufficiency in wholesaling. To me, self-sufficiency means you have options and you have buyers, more than one out there bidding against each other. If you put a property out and all you get back is crickets in the night, little chirping sounds, no one calls you, you do a price reduction and one guy comes along, you're going to have to deal with it. And you may not make as much money as you want to. I have to shift that back to it wasn't a deal in the first place, or you would have had more buyers and you would have had a bigger profit in it. But that's in a different seminar anyway. More importantly than just having a buyer behind you, it should be an actual cash buyer, not other investors who are trying to resell your deal and cannot personally close on the sale. Having said that, some of the most successful wholesalers have none of their own deals. They only resell other people's deals. They have credibility in the industry because they've been doing it. Their buyers come to closing, not all the time, but a lot of the time. What I see very oftentimes is if you're not careful working with the wholesaler who brings you the buyer, you may get stuck with having other people who brought the buyer who then went to the wholesaler, who the wholesaler then brought you that buyer. And instead of having one simple wholesaler as a JV partner, you have an additional 2 or 3. How can that happen? That wholesaler that you went to has the biggest, strongest buyers list in the state maybe. And why are there 2 or 3 other people tacked in? I say 3 because I've seen 3. When I did some research on it years ago, what I found out is the other people are actually his employees. They worked in the same office, they did whatever they wanted for him, and what he did as his way of getting a bonus was just to add them into the equation, which actually took away from your profit in the whole thing. Some wholesalers will say to you, I get a flat fee of $3,000 for finding a buyer, or $5,000, or if they ask you, by the way, what did you pay? They may say to you, I can find a buyer, but we have to split the deal. I used an example in one of the previous seminars, and it was where we had a student bring in a deal, tried to wholesale it, just couldn't find the buyer for it, found the buyer, another wholesaler. The student's net profit was about $9,000. However, when I went to closing and saw the HUD statements because I was funding it, I noticed that the end buyer was paying a $40,000 premium above what we were selling it for. So the investor that we sold it to, who brought that buyer, had marked it up another $40,000. And I mentioned this before, it happened to be an international buyer, but what's the difference between what we did and what he did? He just had a stronger buyers list. It's very simple. Now, in this daisy chain of an investor bringing you a buyer, one of the most important things you can do is not allow an assignment of contract. Why not? Well, because what happens is that assignment now alerts the end buyer to what the original seller is selling it to you for and can really gum up the works. But you say, well, my guy that brought me the buyer doesn't have money to do a double closing. Well, he does. He can fund the transaction through transactional funding. I just did one where the A to B I funded for $180,000. That end buyer C, when it was resold for another $180,000 more. So the B investor netted $180,000, but it wasn't over. The C buyer found an end buyer who was going to rehab the property, change it out of being a single family double lot into townhouses. And that second investor made another $110,000 net profit. So the closing agent said to the second investor, you need the money to close. And he said, well, just use my end buyer's money. And the closing agent said, we don't do that. It's illegal, so we don't do it. So what happened is I funded the A to B as transactional funding, and I funded a different amount for the B to C closing. And I had to send in to the closing agent 2 different amounts. So it can be done, and the profits are out there. But what was important in that transaction? Not the profits. It was the fact that they found an end buyer who had a different vision of the use for the property, rather than selling it as 2 single-family homes on 2 lots. Now, what's always important, and I talk about it every time I think, is make sure you get a larger earnest money deposit than you put up. That's before you sign the sales contract. If the person says to you, I'll send in the deposit in a couple of days, what he's doing many times, if he's not going to rehab the property and he's a large rehabber and you know he's not going to keep it potentially, is he's going to go out and market the property and see what happens. And he doesn't send in the earnest money deposit. So make sure that before you sign the contract with your end buyer that you in fact have his earnest money deposit. Otherwise, if you sign it first and send it to him, he then has the signed contract. And you're going to say to me, David, it's not a valid contract. He never put up the earnest money deposit. Well, that's up to the court to enforce or not enforce. And long before that happens, you're going to lose the property because you can't close on it. And you'll have to just give up the ghost, so to speak. There's plenty of remedies for that. This is not the stage to get into those. So what you really need to do is qualify these supposed cash buyers. All you have to do is ask for a proof of funds. That should be their personal bank account. Now, in my transactional funding, I give out proof of funds. I show an actual bank statement, my bank statement, and I give a letter of credit with it. I have a suspicion that sometimes investors will take the proof of funds off my bank statement and they will send that in instead of sending in the letter of credit. Even though I put them on 2 pages and I say call me to the seller or the listing agent to confirm that the person using the proof of funds is really the person who should be using the proof of funds. So for you, when you get a buyer and he says I'm a cash buyer, make sure he is a cash buyer. I got ripped on one of these, bothered the heck out of me. Did a property in Palm Beach, a historical area, went in, did the rehab on it. Boom. Buyer comes along, he says, I'm this, I'm that, I buy all the time, I'm a cash buyer. I said, great, we'll close in 2 weeks, whatever it was. He said, okay. We got to be about a week out, and I said, you got your funds in place and everything. And he said to me, well, not exactly. My lender walked away, I've got to find another lender. I said, what do you mean lender? You said you were a cash buyer. And his response to me is, well, at the closing, you're going to get cash. That's what a cash buyer is. No. It's not what a cash buyer is. What happened is I took the property back and canceled the contract and sold it to another investor who was truly a cash buyer. Asking for the proof of funds is a very simple question that will save you a lot of aggravation and lost profits down the road. So ask for the proof of funds. If it embarrasses you, ask for the proof of funds and get over your embarrassment. This is a business and you just need to do that. And if the guy says, well, hey, I'm the biggest buyer in the county and no one ever asked me that because I'm such a hotshot, you say to him, well, I have a dumb partner who happens to be doing all of my fundings and he requires it. And if the guy won't give you a proof of funds, the likelihood is he doesn't have the money. So let's talk about, first of all, on the list. What does the depth of your list mean? You hear this term, my depth is really strong. Well, it refers to the quality of your buyers. First of all, their reliability, their reputation in the industry, whether they're actual cash buyers or have access to funding, their stature in the local real estate community. I say that because there are a few wholesalers out there that should be in jail, frankly. That's the best I can say about them. And they go on and on and on and prey on predominantly newbie investors. One of the clues is when you put out your wholesale list, they oftentimes are the very first ones to call within seconds. As soon as your list pops up, boom, they're on it. They offer you a contract, full offering price. You say to yourself, whoa, boy, baby, didn't I make a good deal. And you haven't gotten to closing yet. And one of the things I did if you look on my website, I talk about black hat wholesaling, and I show you an exact example. The investor sits there with me and tells her story where she sold, in this particular case, these wholesalers 2 deals, each with a $10,000 profit. Just before she got to closing, I said to her, here's the deal. We're only going to pay you a $600 profit on each of the deals. That's all they're worth to us. Now, for 2 weeks, they'd been all excited about closing and everything, and they said to her somewhere along the line, we have to check, can you give us the phone number for the seller, because the seller was out of state. And she did. And what they did is they called the seller and said, we're the buyers, and this person is too greedy. We're going to close directly with you. They owned the title company, so they had this all set up. She called me literally from the closing table and said, what do I do? And I said to her, you've learned your first lesson about dealing with those guys. That's their reputation. Take the $600 on each one of the deals. And she said, I can't do that. I'm just not going to do that. And what happened is she didn't get $600. She got nothing. Be careful and check on these wholesalers by asking other investors. This is not a surprise, but ironically, they may also be re-wholesaling your deals. It's okay if they sort of stand up, in this case, for the buyers they're bringing in. You never know for sure. Even a whale buyer who is substantial and has been perfect in his career could go bad on your closing. A real good example is I did an iBuyer closing out of state, and the attorney said to me, I've closed over 2,000 transactions for this buyer. Why? Because the iBuyer was in that state. They were buying extensively there. Most attorneys and closing agents can close anywhere in the state. They directed everything to him. Got a big discount on the closing cost, trying to squeeze everybody they can. And in their contract it said they can cancel up to the day of closing. So if you're going to deal with an iBuyer, better check the contract. And what happened is they closed. But that's the case where I told you. The $53,000 profit evaporated to $1,500 or less, whatever it was. You can see it stage by stage, line item by line item on my site when I do the deal talk on the HUD statements. So again, it's not uncommon and it's not bad, but you should know that if you're going to sign a contract with another investor rather than a JV, you have to say in there that he has liability for closing. He can assign the contract, but he has liability. So there's three types of liability transfer, so to speak. You can assign the contract, but with liability and no assignment whatsoever. So just make sure of your contracting. What percentage of your list is able to buy at any given time? I'm saying to you, build this list. It has to be large, so to speak. 300 is not large, but it's a start. But if you send out an email, first thing you need to look at is the open rate. How many people opened it and looked at it? A low open rate is anything below 10%. They just don't care. They're curious more than anything else. A great open rate is pretty much 15 to 20% or higher. That means you have a good buyers list. But what if they didn't look at their emails when you see the open rate? What if they're not ready to buy? Any number of things. You need to assume that at any given time, only 10% of your list actually is available with funds and is willing to purchase the specific property you have. Alright, so I've been chatting here for a lot of stuff to build you up to it, but let's find buyers. That's what we're here for. Now this is one that I've used extremely successful, and it's mostly for rehabbers, but it doesn't have to be. I have that FSBO power selling system, and it's a round-robin auction, and it drives literally tons and tons of people. I'm going to say hundreds and hundreds, but sometimes it's 200 or more on a given weekend to the property because the signage indicates a highly motivated seller. If you're a rehabber, you're doing 4 or 5 properties a year and you want to do more of them, what you notice when you put it up for sale is a lot of people come and they're not credit worthy or financially qualified. They could save up their money so that they could go to the closing with 10% or 5% down. These days you don't have to have any money to close because the banks are getting very loose with their money again. So you would like ideally to have those people ahead of you, so to speak. Well, a way to accelerate that list of pre-buyers that need their credit worked is you do the FSBO power selling sale, you get it under contract with a buyer, and the next weekend you do it again and again and again until you actually go to closing. Your end buyer, who's your original contract person, is going to say to you, what in the heck are you doing? Why do you keep selling it? And you have to be honest with them. You're looking for more buyers who will come in on your next rehab. And what you do is you simply build a buyer's list of people in the wings getting their credit repaired. Now, how do you know they're going to get their credit repaired? Because you offer to pay for it for free. Why would you do that? Because you don't pay for it until they come to closing. And if they're really serious about getting a house, you can refer them to a credit restoration service and make sure they're actually doing it. Now, what does that do for you? Instead of having to wait a month or 2 months or longer to get the house sold, you can sell it to your list in literally days because they're now qualified and hot and ready to go. Each of these topics I'm going to hit are ways to find buyers. Build your buyers list. So the next thing you do is you go to Google. You type in keywords to find actively advertising buyers. Keywords like buy my house cash, cash for my house, sell fast, any number of those, and you can come up with hundreds of them literally because the wholesalers who have those keywords put all kinds of combinations together. For example, buy my house cash, Miami, cash for my house, Fort Lauderdale. Those are geo-targeted words. Now, what comes up in Google is the first 4 are ads, and it has a little nomenclature up in the left-hand corner. It says AD for ad. Those are paid advertising. After the first 4, typically, there's a couple of organic ones. Below that, there will be also ads because that keywords are very expensive to get clicks on. It's called pay-per-click. What happens is you go there, you see it, you click on the site, and instantly that wholesaler or rehabber in some cases is charged for that click. What does that click cost? Depends on where you are in the country, but it can be anywhere from $10 to $60. Now what does that do for him? it transfers you to his website an application form for you to fill out. So here's what I suggest. Do not go there. Click on their sites. They're going to get bent out of shape if you're clicking and then you expect them to call you because you have a ghost house you have for sale, or you finally have a property and go to them. It has a phone number. Call them up and say, I'm a wholesaler. I have a property for sale. Who do I talk to? They have an acquisitions person. Let him go in there and look at it, build a buyer's list of their criteria. What's their criteria? They only do 3-2s, certain zip codes, whatever it is. It's the same type of criteria that a hedge fund would have or that iBuyers would have. So you might as well get used to that. Some people say, well, make up 2 or 3 lists. That's okay. It doesn't matter how you do it. I prefer one giant list, send it out to all of them. Because at some point in time, your buyer that wants a specific 3-2 and an exact zip code may change his mind and say, that 2-2 I see here is twice the size of any 3-2 we have. We can make that into a 4-2 or 4-3 or whatever. I say send them all. So next thing is search public records for cash buyers, again using keywords like LLC, trust, land trust, any kind of trust, corporations, limited partnerships, any number of things. Now you can do that automatically or you can go ahead and do that on your own. Typically, because there's so many of those, the county records do not allow you to put in LLC and then up comes 1,000 of those. Why these? Because normally LLCs, trust corporations, limited partnerships, and so on are not financed except by hard money lenders. There you are. There's your cash buyers. Now, one of the feedbacks I get from students is, I tried contacting them. Why don't they answer me? Because obviously any new investor in the marketplace knows he wants to find cash buyers, and he can use a data service, for example, Rehabbing, go in there and find cash buyers. And all it does is scrape the public records for these keywords and delivers it to you. And they have 2 types in Rehabbing. One is cash buyer, which means he has bought it and sold it in less than 6 months. Now, what if he's a rehabber and he got lucky and sold it in less than 6 months? He comes up as a cash buyer. That's all there is to it. But if he's a cash holder, that means he's going over the 6 months, and that's a separate category in Rehabbing. Who are most of the cash holders? Well, the guys that didn't do the rehab very well are multifamily property holders, where they intended to hold it, but they're cash buyers because they couldn't get a loan directly through the bank. If you're going to build an empire of multifamily properties, duplexes, triplexes, you're going to learn very quickly that if you go to a conventional lender, they're going to say to you, we'll loan to you, but not in an LLC. You have to transfer it into your own name so you have personal liability, which is one of the reasons you put it in an LLC was to not have personal liability. So those are choices you have to make. So I said buyers who paid cash, but you can also search for the mortgage at the time of closing. Now this could be an entity or an actual homeowner. By the way, one of these things that you do not look for as cash buyers are condos, because ironically a lot of people from the north, snowbirds, ultimately sell their homes up there. They move down here and they buy condos for cash. Again, Rehabbing, you can sort condos for cash and you'll find out that 70% more or more of them, maybe as high as 85%, were done with cash. And the reason is the other 15% weren't done is people didn't have the cash, but it's very difficult to get a loan on a condo from a conventional lender. You know my feelings about condo. They're kryptonite as far as I'm concerned because of the HOAs. This is a separate sort. No mortgage at the time of closing, and it can be an entity or actual home buyer, and you can sort for equity in Rehabbing. Now, social media and online groups have been the big rage probably for the past 3 or 4 years. Most of them are flaky as all get out because everybody's doing it. When you have something that you're doing that seemingly works, or that a guru is selling a program on who's telling you it works, everybody rushes into it. You should add anybody to your list initially, but you need to clean your list of dead wood at least every 6 to 9 months. Now, how do you know if they're dead wood? I'd consider the source before you put them in there, but they haven't done anything with you in 6 to 9 months. So ones that have been in there for more than 6 to 9 months, take them out. Why would I take them out? Simply because your list is going to get too big and bulky, and you're wasting your time and money sending it out to some of them. REI meetings. Any place in the country there are REIA meetings. RIA meetings have a value, especially in their vendor list and especially the educational side of it. The question here is the people that come to the RIA meetings, how many of them are newbies versus professionals that are constant buyers or powerful wholesalers? The constant buyers and powerful wholesalers probably represent maybe 3 to 5% of the audience. They don't need to come to the meeting. They're not interested in talking to newbies because they only want to know if you have a deal or not, and they're easy to find. So RIA meetings have a great value, but those cards that you get in the card swaps are just that. They're cards. What about Bandit signs? You're going to find out if you use Bandit signs, I buy houses, cash, close in 30 seconds, whatever you're putting on the sign, you're going to get an awful lot of other investors calling you. They're not selling their house. They're calling you to find out what else you have for sale, to get on your buyer's list. Typically, those are the guys who don't have any properties for sale and want to be on your buyer's list to see if they can, in fact, have something to resell of yours. Put them on your list. That's all there is to it. And I say this again, I have students who do nothing but put out Bandit signs. I have others who do nothing but drive for dollars, and they make very substantial incomes. So this can be part of what you do, but whatever you do, you got to do it right, and you got to focus on it long enough to determine if in fact it really works. I tell people if you're going to go into an advertising scenario, plan on enough money to do it for 3 months and have somebody look over your materials, whether they're mailers, postcards, letters, or whatever else, to make sure that the piece you're delivering has what it needs. It needs to answer the question, why you? Why do they need you? What can you give them that somebody else can't? And a call to action, a closing. The other thing you can do is use other people's lists, OPLs. You can list swap. Now this is very, very common in internet marketing. Not so much in wholesalers deals because nobody wants to share their end buyers. Pay to use a list. Sometimes you can get away with a flat fee. Used to be in the good old days that was very common. You go in there and I will pay you $1,250 was kind of a going number, maybe $1,500. But here's the issue with that. Let's say you go in there and you advertise a property that's really a ghost property. You may have it under contract for $100,000 and you advertise it for $30,000. What's going to happen? However many people are on that list that are actual buyers, they're going to be on you like flies on rotten meat. What does that mean? It means that you have now had the ability to create or suck out that other wholesalers' best buyers. So that's why most wholesalers came to the realization of we can't afford to do that. Also, many of the wholesalers will give you a flat fee number. If they say I'll split the deal with you, that's going to be very, very expensive. However, if you have no other options, you got to do what you got to do to get through it. Just remember, focus more on your buyer's list so it doesn't have to happen again. So I mentioned before whale buyers, what defines them. And basically what defines them is they're a continuous buyer on a month-to-month basis. Very oftentimes in a geographic area that they will tell you about. I only buy this street to that street, so on and so forth. And they may well own 600 homes or doors if they have also mixed in multifamilies in that geographical area. And they're easy to find. If you go in and you look at cash buyers in Rehabbing, for example, you can tell how many properties they own. It shows it. There are the whale buyers, and the question is, do you want to deal with the whale buyers? You should get sophisticated on it. So what's a baby whale? A baby whale is you go in, you look at cash buyers, and you see that he doesn't have 300 or 100. He has 20 to maybe 100. That's a baby whale. Typically they're rehabbers and they're crunching along, or they are landlords and they're accumulating rental properties. One of the things you want to do when you get a property under contract is go in and search for the zip code for cash buyers. That's who you want to go with first. What do I do with them? I'll talk about that later, but what you're going to do is create easily online postcard with a picture of the property and the price you're asking for it and pop them in the mail instantly. That app is available on the phone and you can do that while you're sitting in front of the house. Find the largest wholesaler in your area and make friends. Common sense. Don't invite them out to lunch. Hi, Dave, I want to invite you out to lunch. Come on out and tell me everything you know and blah, 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 blah. No, they're busy. That's what makes them a large wholesaler, because they're busy. So what you need to do is call up and introduce yourself and say, what's the process for me showing you my deals? If they're friendly, they will tell you exactly how to do it because they're going to make money at doing it. If they're cranky or arrogant, go on to the next one. The best way in this business to understand that your word is your bond is to do what you say you're going to do. When you go into a contract with an end buyer and another buyer comes along and offers more money, you start dancing a jig about, well, I'm going to cancel the other guy, or you start doing stuff like that. I call it moccasin mouth. What people are going to say about you is nothing good, nothing that you'd want to hear, but is it true? It may or may not be. What you need to do is stand your ground, and if you said you're going to do it, go ahead and do it, even if it cost you money. Now, one of the things that happens, I don't know, I'm going to say maybe once a month that I see, is a wholesaler's list is sent out with a property on it, and the person who sent it out made a mistake. What happens is they sent out the list and CC'd it or carbon copied it rather than BCC'd it, which is a blind carbon copy. What's the difference? In a blind carbon copy, you don't know who the other people are on the list. So boom, suddenly you get a property from the wholesaler you've been looking at for a while, and it has 1,200 other attachments. Whoa! Can you then increase your buyer's list by 1,200? You can, and the cost is $16,000 per spam complaint. So if you're going to do that, you've got to integrate it into your system, or be very careful about where you integrate it into. I'm not going to get into how to beat the system on integrating those here in this, but if you're uncomfortable about spamming other people or having yourself spammed, then don't do it. Typically, if somebody sends out the BCC instead of the CC, that's cause for being fired, so you know how important it is. Find realtors who have cash buyer lists. In other words, they have built lists of cash buyers for themselves, meaning they're wholesalers also, or just for commissions. The difference is if they're buying the properties for themselves and re-wholesaling them, it doesn't matter. All you care about is, do they have a property, get on their list, what price is it at? What typically happens with these agents is they're in the business for a long time or a short time. They realize very quickly, I'm making tips when I'm splitting this 5 or 6% with an end buyer coming in. I'm done with that. I'm not accepting any offers from a buyer's agent. I'm going to put them out myself. Well, how do you build a buyer's list? Well, every day for any listing they have, they should be getting calls from investors who say, hi, my name's Dave, I'm an investor, a cash buyer, I can close in 30 seconds. What do you got? And they say, don't got anything. But what they should say is, great, I'll put you on my buyer's list the next time I get something. Are you ready to close? Do you have cash? Oh yeah, I'm Dave, I have cash. And then they build a buyer's list almost as fast as they can do it. What happens? They get a property under contract, they put it out to the list after they marked it up. And they may ask that end buyer to give them a 3% buyer's agent commission in addition. And besides that, they're getting a 6% commission from the original seller. And I've been through this many times with you about the hybridism aspect of being a realtor. So one of the common things is a website or a squeeze page for buyers. What's the difference? A website is a full-blown website that adds credibility to you as a buyer. And very simply, it tells somebody coming in how responsible you are, how you close, you take care of everything, all that good stuff. A squeeze page, however, is where a buyer is looking for something. He Googles online how to sell my house. And you have put together a 20-page brochure or 40-page brochure that says, here's how to sell your house. What does that do for you? Well, it captures their name, preferably, and email address, and maybe their phone number, and it allows you to go to them and say, by the way, I actually am a cash buyer, and I can buy your house and close very quickly. By the way, why are you selling? And if there's any kind of mention from the seller of a time frame, boom, you have a very viable prospect. That's called a squeeze page because it doesn't have a big website behind it. But my question is here, how are they going to find you? Well, there's only two ways. Either pay per click, which I mentioned before can cost you anywhere from $10 to $40 or $60 a click, or you can do what's called SEO. That's called search engine optimization. That requires you building your website with content. Google likes content. Good, bad, or ugly, they love content. They love consistent content, and they rank your website higher with more content and more valuable content because more people come to view it. That can take a long time and it can be very expensive. So I'm going to talk about what is the value of your email list. This is a very, very important question. You've heard me say it. It is the most valuable asset you will ever have in your investing career, including rental properties that you own. And you say to me, Dave, that's ridiculous. I get rental income every month. If you use your email list properly, you can have much more income much more often than monthly. Remember, by wholesaling other people's deals. So I'm going to go into how we calculate the value, but it should be pretty simple. What are your total profits for that time period? And I would suggest you don't use 1 month because that distorts the picture. You use as many months as you can. So very often, 1 year is an excellent time frame because it smooths out the ups and downs of the cycle in your real estate wholesaling or investing. So you take that number, and let's say, just to pick a number, it's $100,000, and you have 1,000 people on your email list. What's the value of your email list? Well, 100,000 divided by 1,000 is $100. Right? 100,000. What's the $100? That's the value of your email list. I'll show you in a second how for each of those prospects on your list. Now, one of the things you want to do, I'll get to the value of the email list and show it to you in a numerical form shortly. You want to track other wholesalers' transactions. First of all, you want to be on there to look at their deals and see what's happening. But you also want to look at what closes. Well, you'll find out that a lot of them don't close. What doesn't, obviously, is important to you, and who the buyers are. In the good old days when, there was not a lot of buyers out there and you went to a wholesaler, he would say to you up front, if you ever go back to my buyer, and some of them had it in writing, then you owe me $1,000 each time he buys another, or $2,000, or $5,000. Each time he buys another property from you. And students would come to me and say, is that legal? I said, did you sign a contract that says that? How long is the contract good for? Now, at the time I thought, gee, that's pretty petty, but the reality is it was smart, but it didn't last. Because what happened is other investors didn't go to those guys. And those buyers weren't getting deals. So what they did is they started looking around for other people that had deals. What you're going to look at is what closes, what doesn't, and go back after the deals that didn't close, as well as look who the buyers are on the deals that do close. Also look for niche buyers. Landlord, I call them tired landlords. Refax is built in to their filters. Landlords who have owned the properties for 4 years or more. What does that mean? The average landlord, despite what you think, only lasts 3.5 years before he goes raging into the night saying, my tenants know more about legal issues than I do. And they're right. That's what the guys do. They sit at home and figure out from others of their clan or whatever, how can I take advantage of the rich and fat landlord? That's what they do. They're professional tenants is what they're called. Landlords burn properties. Now, when I talk about burn properties, there's a fortune to be made in them. Contractors have to repair them. They have to pull permits, all the sorts of things that happen. When a property has a fire, most often it's a kitchen fire, most often it's food that caught on fire, but the city or county condemns the property. Even if it's livable, they condemn it, so it has to be brought back up to standards to be able to move back into it. There's certain contractors that do that. When I say burned, I don't mean a pile of ash. I mean specifically a property that's had mild smoke damage and the roof has not been cut open by the fireman's axes to spray water in. That's a unique niche that we've been very profitable with. Rehabbers, all you have to do is drive around, watch for dumpsters at single-family homes under rehabs, and say, hi, who's the owner here? And it's going to be the investor who's not on site. Typically, you can find out his name and number and give him a call. Code enforcement issues. There's some services that actually provide you with code enforcement liens on a property. Watch out who buys these properties because they're savvy and are willing to confront those lien issues. Well, how do you find them? You can pay for a service that finds them for you, or as you are making offers and you realize has a lot of code enforcement issues, watch who buys the property. Short sale buyers. These are a group unto themselves. Typically, there can be wholesalers, but most often they're rehabbers, and you can watch and see how long it takes them. Now, I'm talking about watching this and watching that, and you could be spending your entire day watching what other people are doing, who their buyers are, what buyers don't close, so on and so forth. It's a whole business unto itself. But it's not for you to do. It's well below your pay grade. This is where you get a VA, a virtual assistant, to do this. You set it up so you know exactly where to go, what to do, how to fill in the spreadsheets, whatever you're using. You make a video of how to do it, and then you train a VA. And when that VA goes bad on you, put up another video for the next VA, and you get back on track. That's how you scale a business that you don't yet have. Wholesalers and rehabbers. These are listed in REIFAX as cash holders. What does that mean? It means they've been in the property for more than 6 months. They were cash buyers by the nature of the entity they purchased it in, and here they are. So what's a wholesaler? A wholesaler is a rehabber who went in there with the intent of lipstick on a pig, put it on the open market, and try to get as much as you can. Rehabbers, full-blown everything if need be. New kitchen, new bathrooms, new everything. So they're in there for more than 6 months. What does that mean? It's not working as well as they had thought. Doesn't matter. They're prospects for future wholesale deals that you're the seller, because they're going to go back to trying to wholesale, lipsticking it, or in fact rehabbing it full blown. Craigslist. I call it the loony list, but the reality is there are real buyers on there. You can see them advertising ghost properties. And there are real sellers on there, although they're few and far between, being real, I mean. But those sellers are also other wholesalers who you can add to your list. Facebook, same old thing. Facebook advertising become very popular, too popular. What they've done is driven up the price dramatically on the ads. So if you see somebody advertising there, he either has some money or he's going to run out of it quickly. They also scrutinize your ads, and your ad campaign that's been cruising along and bringing you 10 times the amount of money you put into it can be closed down immediately for some unknown reason. So be careful if you're going to advertise on Facebook. I said this already about you can list a property online, call it a ghost property, and elsewhere if you can get away with it. For example, if you want to list your property on Zillow, you have it under contract, you have an equitable interest in it, you rush out to list it on Zillow. They come back and say, you can't list it because you're not on title. And you say, yeah, I have an equitable interest. Dave Dinkel told me I can do this. I didn't tell you you can do that. Because what they want to see is either a licensed agent attached to it so they can collect a fee, or if you're a FSBO, for sale by owner, you have to be on title. But there are other websites like Craigslist most likely where you can put a ghost property online. Just the same thing you can do on a Bandit sign. 322 pool, waterfront, ocean access, $1,200. You know, something stupid. It's a ghost property. I said $1,200 because I've seen signs that say exactly that and $10,000, where in fact it's a ghost property. You're expecting to go there, see a burned property, you go there and it's a nice property. What happened? That's not this one. I sold that one. But what it does is generate leads for you. Use a fictitious email to get on wholesalers' list and track their deals. I alluded to this before. I call it recycling. And again, it's a special thing that you should have a VA do because there's a lot of deals out there. What you'll see is 123 Main Street for $100,000. On another wholesaler's list, you'll see 123 Main Street for $110,000. I used an example in my students' materials, 123 Main Street for $140,000. Now, typically, the wholesaler who has the property is the lowest in price. The other guys are putting it out there hoping you'll come to them. Why would you pay $140 for a property you can go to a guy that has it under contract for $100? Because you're not on his list. That's the reason. And those guys that have it for $140 will sell it. So you need to get on every wholesaler's list so you can see who's doing what and who the power players are, as well as you may want to resell a property they have on their list. So geo-targeting and geofencing. Everybody's all excited about geofencing. What is it? The keywords that I mentioned to you when you look for anything in a search, either on Google or data services, buy my house cash, sell fast. The geo-targeting aspect is sell my house, buy my house fast, Fort Lauderdale, Miami, Dade County. It doesn't matter. When Google puts it out there for searches, that's a keyword that if it comes up that you're putting it into your computer and you're in Fort Lauderdale or in Dade, it recognizes where you are. Gosh, guys, you don't realize that Google knows where you are every time you're on your computer as well as on your phone? They do. You know, big thing, but that's what it is. They also know what kind of advertising you've ever looked at in your life, and when you go to some website, advertising comes up coincidentally about something you may have looked at 6 months or a year ago. It's called retargeting. Now, geofencing takes it to a higher level. It allows you to go into a subdivision. If something happens in that subdivision or that targeted area, it can actually give you a notification of it, like a for sale by owner sign, a for sale by owner listing, a new listing, or anything that happens where an investor would be interested in seeing it. It's called geofencing. Microcosms down your geo-targeting. What do you need from a prospective buyer? You've got the property, you put it out for sale, a buyer comes along, And mostly what you need is his name and his email. Of course, I'm not saying his phone number because he's called you in most cases. If he hasn't, you need the phone number. And you need to make sure that you can contact him. If you put it under contract and you can't get him by text or by phone, I would suggest you figure out where he lives and go knock on his door. If you're going to save the closing, you may want to find out what's going on. Very oftentimes the seller changes his mind about selling. Why? Because somebody else made him a higher offer. He had seller's remorse. It doesn't matter. But a student or an investor will call me and say, I can't get in touch with Mrs. Smith. The closing is in 2 days. What do I do? I say, what did you do? I emailed her. I texted her. I left 25 phone messages. I say, well, where does she live? She doesn't live in that house. She lives 2 doors down. Go out there and knock on the door until she opens the door and ask her what's going on. Everything's in place, so on and so forth. If she doesn't answer the door, keep going back until she does. She's not going to call the police on you, because if she does, you know she's in there. But that's the way to get their attention, is to go find them. How do you get them to join your list? This is kind of important, because if they don't join your list, you're spamming them if you get their email. What you need to do is call, most importantly if you can, skip trace them if you have to, mail them, and if you can get an email address, email them. How do you get their email address? A skip trace service. Most of the skip trace services, when you narrow it down, will also give you an email address associated with that house and that person's name. So how do you keep them on your list? Prior to this, what I've gone over is where do you find them and how do you get them on the list? And now, how do you keep them on your list? That's what's most important. Because if you build this gigantic moving blob called a massive buyers list and you never send them anything, what's going to happen to them? Well, it's called a drip. And a drip is you either send them properties or you send them something that might be of interest to them. Realtors are exceptionally good at auto-responding drips where they go to a service and they give them 50, for example, insights into how to sell your house, what to do, neighborhoods, I don't know, everything you can think of. What does it cost them? Probably not very much. Remember, you're dealing with a list of investors who should be cash buyers. So what do you drip on them? Other pieces of information you collect from someplace else. You can get what are called RSS feeds for news. Most importantly, if you don't send them a property, they're going to drop off your list from being tired of not seeing anything from you except stuff that they don't care about. So if you do nothing more than drip on them with somebody else's property because you don't have a property yourself. How often do you do it? I don't know. Depends on your list. The least you want to do it is once every 2 weeks. The most you want to do it is once a week. Or when you get your list going, if you're going to work with other wholesalers, their property on your list, preferably at the same price they have it as on their list, so they're giving you something out of their spread if you bring your buyer, then you can do it as often as you want. And I see some of the largest wholesalers have huge lists and no properties except other wholesalers. And they just literally put anything up on their list, and they could have 100 at a time, none of which are theirs. How does that work for them? Depends on the wholesaler. It can work fabulously well, or it may not work at all. Depends on your list and what you drip on them. Again, I answered this question. What if you don't have properties to sell? Use other people's properties, very simply. So let's talk about how much should you make on each deal. Well, you should make as much as you can. Too often times, students or investors will say to me, I calculated this value, and after repair, and I calculated the repairs, and I got to leave enough on the table for the rehabber to come in. Look, the rehabber is going to come in, do his own estimate of repairs. He's going to know exactly what it's going to cost him, unless he has a big surprise. But he doesn't know surprises. He knows that he's going to pay this for repairs. He knows what he calculates the after repaired value to be, and oh, by the way, there you are. So how much should you mark it up? As much as you can. At the very least, mark it up what a commission would be as an agent, 6%. Again, you're working for tips like the agent is, but you're not over yet. You have not gone to the closing table. What you have to do is work that seller into a position to make your profit larger when you get to the closing table. Now, if you're doing an assignment of contract, you better make sure that your assignment contract allows for you to make a larger profit. In case you get a better deal and you go to closing and you've assigned it, your assignee is going to make a larger profit. So think about what your assignment contract is going to say. Okay, so let's talk about, let me show you what the value of your list can be. So here's a simplified, what I call a value matrix. Here's the number of prospects on your list, and this can be for wholesalers, it can be for internet marketers, it doesn't matter. It's just an evaluation idea. So what's the value per prospect per month? Remember we calculated if you do 100,000, you have 1,000 on your list. It's $100 per prospect. So what's the total estimated income? So when people ask me, where do I start? Let's assume you get about 500 people on your buyers list. I said to you that not all of them are buyers, so on and so forth. The value per prospect per month is somewhere between $20 and $100. What does that mean? It means that with 500 on your list, you should be making between $10,000 and $50,000 a month. Now there's a lot of variables in wholesaling and in the value of properties and your buyers. This is a guideline. The guideline is I want you to try and get 300 to 500 somewhat actual cash buyers on your list to begin with. But let's go further quickly. If you have 1,000, 5,000, or 10,000, what are you making per month? As you'll see, the value per prospect drops, but if you look at the total estimated income, it is steadily rising. So if you say to me, Dave, you're talking about $100,000 a month income. Absolutely. How big is the buyer's list? In this case, it's 10,000 plus. These are real, actual numbers that I see my students and other wholesalers earning based on the size of their buyers list, not just internet marketing. So the results can vary greatly. As I said, they depend on the quality of your email, the depth of your email list, but it's the intent is to show you what the value can be. That's what it's for. So I'm going to go through these very quickly, trying to wrap it up for you. 10 mistakes investors make building their buyers list. These are somewhat in the order of the importance of the mistake. The bigger mistakes first. The first one is not understanding how important it is. You are your buyers list. I have a student in North Central Florida. He's probably on this, listening to this. He will tell you that when he first came to me with his sales, he was saying to me, I got this buyer and he buys everything I have and he gives me $5,000. I don't have to do anything. Just find him, put him under contract, assign the contract to him. $5,000, it's great. I said, well, give me an example. And the example was he wholesaled it to him for $70,000 after repaired value is like $180, and it required about $30,000 in repairs. And the student said to me, maybe I should be looking at doing these. And I said, how big is your buyers list? And he said, I have 2. Well, 2's not enough. And now, even though the student did a couple of rehabs, I know for sure that he would much rather wholesale. He said to me recently in the first quarter of this year, he had his biggest month ever. It was in excess of $50,000 in wholesale profit. Gee, why do you think? Did he have a lot more houses? No, he had a lot more on his buyers list, and he could get double to triple what he was getting before on the same types of properties with other buyers who were not so greedy, I'm going to say. Make it easy. So you need to get at least 300 minimum, 500 preferably, to get your list going. I'm stressing it again, but too few means too few dollars back to you. Not understanding quality versus quantity. And in the beginning, just get quantity and then weed out the dead wood on a regular basis. Improperly approaching other wholesalers. You're the low person on the totem pole. You ask them questions and listen. And don't try to get an education from them about how to do wholesaling. That's not what they're there for. These guys are professional machines. They will take advantage of you if you allow them to. So you got to be up to how things happen and know what you're doing before you start talking to them. Not targeting niche needs. Remember I mentioned to you before burned houses, landlords, so on and so forth. Find those niches, find those buyers, and add them to your buyers list. Not contacting your list frequently enough. Again, I went through weekly, at least every 2 weeks. But if you don't, it's a decaying asset, and it's no good to build it if you're not going to use it. It's like a muscle. It goes into apathy if you don't use it. You have to be adding prospects as often as you're getting deals. It should be as important as finding deals. Again, don't worry about offering them something. You have plenty of other wholesalers around you. Just make sure that the deal somewhat makes sense before you put it out. How do you do that? You evaluate the deal. You're a wholesaler. You're in the market to do this. This is what you do in evaluating properties. So if you say to myself, I don't know if it's a good deal, go backwards in time and start over figuring out how do I know it's a good deal. Not outsourcing the contracting of your list. In other words, you got a big list now, 1,000, 2,000, and you go through and you say, gee, I got to make up the list. I have 5 or 6 properties. So you hire a VA. and the VA does it for you, and you're paying a few bucks an hour or whatever it is, and this is like nirvana, then suddenly you have a rogue VA on your hands. He or she quits because she had access to your buyer's list. She then goes out and sells it to other investors and sells it to everybody on your list. That's her first source of leads. You need to outsource the contacting of the list, but do not outsource the ability to copy the list. In other words, having them send a BCC, having them have the ability to send a CC or have a spreadsheet with all of your buyers on it. Not focusing on finding these elusive whale and baby whales. I mean, it doesn't sound like much, but it's nice if you have them out there, you know their criteria, and you put in enough of a spread where they don't say to you, my numbers are such that I can't let you make that much money on this one. I'll make it up to you on the next one. That's BS. They don't make it up on the next one. They may never do another one with you. You just say, stick to your guns. I got to make this because whatever reason, there's somebody else in the deal. My funding partner has another buyer at this price. Whatever's comfortable for you. If you don't have another buyer out there on your list, then you have to take the deal, and you learn from it, I hope. I think this is one of the biggest ones. You need to pick 5 to 10 of these prospecting methods that I showed you above and siphon out prospects from every one of them. You can build your buyers list almost as quickly as you can do the numbers. There's some in here that I haven't told you about. That's because I keep those for mentor students, frankly. They're very quick and very efficient, but it's not fair to give them to the public, where the public is then scratching and clawing, and they kill that particular type of source of high-quality buyers. So the ones I've given you are more than enough to create a massive buyers list in a short time period, but you have to work them. And whatever method you use, I think I mentioned it before, do it for a period of at least 3 weeks. I've taken a little longer than I wanted to really take, but I want to mention once again and very quickly, if you have questions, you can reach me at blogdinkel, Dinkel, @gmail.com. What I do with those questions is I answer them after I sort through them to make sure that I'm not answering 5 emails that have the same question. If you sent in a question and you didn't get an answer, it's because you didn't go to the last REIA meeting, where the last half of the meeting I answered a whole bunch of questions from the previous seminars. Well, I'm Dave Dinkel. I wish you limitless success in all that you do, and get out there and do it, but be safe.